The galaxy stands at a precipice. For eons it has witnessed the ebb and flow of power, the rise and fall of empires, and the clash of civilizations. Among the countless forces that shape its fate, one stands as a harbinger of death itself, the Nightbringer. To some, he is a myth, a shadow of a time long past, but for those who understand the true nature of the universe, his return is an inevitability, one that carries with it untold consequences. The Necron, ancient and enigmatic, have always lurked in the background of galactic history, their motives cryptic, their power terrifying. But there is one among them whose very name strikes fear into the hearts of those who remember: the Nightbringer. A god of death, an entity born from the darkest forces of creation, he was once among the most powerful of the Khitan, star gods who wielded unfathomable might. In the cosmic dance of existence, his power is singular, the ability to bring about the end of all things. For those who walk the mortal plane, the implications of the Nightbringer's return are profound. It is not merely the resurrection of an ancient being, it is the resurgence of death itself. The very fabric of reality trembles in the wake of his return, for the Nightbringer's influence does not merely end lives. It tears at the fabric of existence, unraveling the threads that hold the universe together. In this video, we will explore the galaxy's uncertain future as it faces the inevitable return of the Nightbringer. What does his return mean for the countless factions that populate the galaxy? Will they be able to stand against the unstoppable force of death, or will the galaxy itself crumble beneath his cold gaze? To answer this question, we must first understand the players involved, the events that have led to this moment, and the mysterious forces that are at work behind the scenes. This is not a simple story of good versus evil. It is a story of survival, of desperation, and of the stark realities that lie at the heart of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. The Nightbringer's return is inevitable. The only question that remains is whether the galaxy itself can survive the coming storm. The Nightbringer stands as one of the most terrifying entities in the galaxy. Once a god of unimaginable power, he is the embodiment of death itself. As one of the Khitan star gods that ruled over the galaxy in a time before even the Imperium, he had the ability to destroy entire worlds with but a thought. Though his physical form was shattered and his essence enslaved by the Necron dynasties, his return is inevitable. He is a symbol of annihilation, and his very presence heralds the potential end of life as it is known. His role in the galactic balance is undeniable. Wherever he appears, death follows. His power is ancient, and his thirst for destruction remains unquenched. The Necrons, the ancient race of robotic beings once known as the Necrontyre, have been plagued by a past steeped in betrayal and cosmic horror. Though their empire is vast, their true power lies in the dark gods they once served. The Necrons have long been driven by the lust for power, and in their bid to free themselves from their mortal forms, they forged pacts with the Khitan. These pacts granted them immortality, but at a great cost. They became slaves to these star gods. The Necrons are now a race in search of redemption, but their origins are dark, and their true loyalties are often uncertain. The return of the Nightbringer represents a reckoning for the Necron race, whose history is inextricably linked to his rise to power. The Necron overlords and the Silent King are some of the most powerful figures within this empire, each of them facing the return of the Nightbringer with differing ambitions. The Imperium of Man, the dominant human empire, is a force to be reckoned with. However, it is a fractured and decaying realm, constantly under siege from countless enemies, both internal and external. The Imperium is beset on all sides, struggling to maintain order and defend its territories. The Adeptus Astartes, Space Marines, are some of the most formidable warriors in the galaxy, but even they may not be enough to stop the Nightbringer. The Imperium is led by the Emperor, whose godlike presence continues to influence the human race. But even his influence may not be enough to hold back the coming storm. Within the Imperium, various factions play their part in defending humanity, from the Inquisition's ruthless tactics to the Ecclesiarchy's faith-driven resolve. The return of the Nightbringer threatens to cast doubt on all of their efforts and brings into question whether humanity itself can survive his wrath. The forces of chaos, though often fragmented, are always present in the galaxy, working their dark schemes in the background. The Chaos Gods, Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh, are the eternal enemies of the Imperium, and their followers thrive on conflict and destruction. Though they are often locked in their own eternal war, the return of the Nightbringer could serve to unify them in a way not seen before. His power over death and his ability to unravel the very fabric of existence may be of interest to the Chaos Gods, who delight in the suffering and corruption of the universe. Chaos Space Marines, with their dark and twisted powers, may find themselves drawn to the Nightbringer's influence, seeking to harness his power for their own ends. Whether they ally with or oppose him remains uncertain, but their role in the upcoming conflict is sure to be significant. The Eldar, an ancient race of psychic beings, have long known the price of arrogance. Their civilization once stood as a beacon of power in the galaxy, but their decline came swiftly, driven by their own excesses. Now they are a fractured people, with the craft world Eldar, Dark Eldar, and the Harlequins all pursuing different paths. However, their knowledge of the Nightbringer and the C'tan is extensive, and they understand the stakes of his return. Some factions may seek to prevent his resurrection, while others may choose to stand aside or even collaborate with him in the hope of using his power for their own ends. The Eldar's role in the coming conflict will be one of both caution and calculation, as they work to secure their future in a galaxy that seems determined to consume them. The Tau Empire, though young compared to the ancient races of the galaxy, is rapidly growing in strength. Their philosophy of the greater good has seen them expand their influence, recruiting other species into their fold. The Tau are technologically advanced, and their ability to adapt and innovate is unmatched. However, the Nightbringer's return presents a unique challenge for the Tau. While their weapons and strategies are powerful, they may not be enough to withstand the full force of the C'tan. The Tau must decide whether they will attempt to stand against the Nightbringer or try to form alliances with other factions to ensure their survival. Their role in the coming events will be one of strategic importance, as they must carefully balance their desire to expand with the need to defend their people. The Orcs, a boisterous and unpredictable race, may seem like an odd inclusion in the conflict surrounding the Nightbringer's return. However, the Orcs thrive on war and destruction, and the return of a being capable of bringing about the end of all things is sure to excite them. The Orcs' approach to battle is chaotic and often unpredictable, but their sheer numbers and strength make them a formidable force. Whether they will be drawn to the Nightbringer as a new target for their warlike tendencies, or whether they will become an obstacle in his path, remains to be seen. The Orcs' role is one of chaos and mayhem, as they seek to turn the impending conflict into yet another opportunity for mindless destruction. The Tyranids, a hive-minded race of bioengineered creatures, are always searching for new worlds to consume. Their role in the galaxy is one of insatiable hunger, and they are relentless in their pursuit of biomass. While the Nightbringer's return may seem like a distant concern to the Tyranids, their hunger knows no bounds. They are capable of adapting to nearly any threat, and their presence in the galaxy could make them a wild card in the conflict surrounding the C'tan's resurgence. Whether they will be drawn to the same worlds that the Nightbringer targets, or whether they will be in conflict with him, is uncertain, but their role will undoubtedly be one of destruction. Lastly, the mysterious forces of the Necron pariahs and other ancient entities who remain in the shadows may hold the key to the unfolding drama. Their role is unclear, but their influence over events is undeniable. These silent forces may have a greater understanding of the true nature of the galaxy than any of the current factions, and their actions could tip the balance in ways that no one anticipates. Each of these factions, with their diverse motives and powers, will play a pivotal role in the galaxy's future as the Nightbringer's return looms on the horizon. The stakes could not be higher, and the outcomes are uncertain. But one thing is clear. The galaxy stands at a crossroads, and the forces involved will shape its future in ways unimaginable. For eons, the Nightbringer's presence in the galaxy has been little more than a distant memory. A force of unimaginable power, he once ruled with an iron grip, a god of death whose mere existence shattered entire civilizations. However, his story is one of tragic betrayal and cosmic manipulation, for even gods are not immune to the passage of time, nor to the cruel machinations of their own kin. In the ancient days, the Nightbringer was one of the most powerful of the C'tan, beings of star-like power who once strode across the cosmos, devouring stars and imposing their will upon all living things. Yet, as with all the C'tan, his downfall came not at the hands of mortal enemies, but from within his own ranks. The Necrontyr, a race of beings who had once sought immortality at any cost, had entered into an unholy pact with the C'tan. These star gods granted the Necrontyr the very immortality they sought, but at a terrible price. The Necrontyr became bound to the C'tan, their bodies transformed into the cold, unfeeling forms of the Necron. The C'tan, once masters of the stars, sought to use the Necrontyr as instruments of their will, driving the galaxy into a new age of destruction and conquest. However, the Necrontyr had underestimated the true nature of the C'tan's power, and as the war between these two factions raged on, the Necrons ultimately found themselves bound not just by their servitude, but by the treachery of their gods. The Nightbringer, in particular, was one of the most feared of the C'tan, his power so great that it could snuff out entire suns. He was a being of death, a god whose very essence was tied to the destruction of life itself. Yet, as the war between the C'tan and the Necrons continued to escalate, it became clear that the Necrons were not merely pawns in the hands of their gods. They were also becoming a force in their own right. The Silent King, the ruler of the Necron dynasties, was among the first to recognize the potential threat posed by the C'tan. As the Necrons began to evolve beyond their role as mere instruments of the C'tan's will, they began to question their place in the universe. This led to the eventual betrayal of the C'tan by the Necrons, culminating in a great conflict that would see the death or imprisonment of most of the star gods. The Nightbringer's fall was not one of violence or destruction. Instead, it was a careful and deliberate act of betrayal, orchestrated by the Necrons themselves. Through a combination of cunning and advanced technology, the Necrons were able to imprison the Nightbringer, locking him away in a tomb, a place where his power could no longer be wielded against them. His body, once a vessel of untold power, was shattered, and his essence was sealed away, leaving behind only a hushed whisper of his former self. His disappearance marked the end of an era, the end of the reign of the C'tan, and the beginning of a new age for the Necrons. But even in imprisonment, the Nightbringer's influence did not fade completely. His presence continued to haunt the galaxy, a shadow that lingered in the darkest corners of space. While the Necrons themselves began to awaken from their slumber, they found themselves confronted by a new set of challenges. The galaxy had changed during the long eons of their dormancy, and their enemies had evolved in ways they could never have predicted. Still, the Necrons were driven by the same hunger for power, and with the return of the Silent King and the resurgence of their dynasties, they began to turn their eyes once more to the galaxy. As the Necrons began to awaken from their tomb worlds, they discovered that the galaxy had been torn apart by wars and conflicts of unimaginable scale. The Imperium of Man, once the dominant force in the galaxy, had fractured and splintered, its once great empire now in a constant state of turmoil. The forces of chaos, ever present and ever tempting, had gained ground, while the Eldar and other ancient races had been reduced to shadows of their former selves. In the midst of this chaos, the Necrons sought to reclaim their place at the top of the galactic hierarchy. But there was a deeper, more troubling force at work. The stars themselves had begun to change. the fabric of reality itself seemed to be unraveling, and strange cosmic events had begun to occur with increasing frequency. It was as though the universe itself was beginning to wake up, and in doing so, it was stirring something ancient and powerful. The Nightbringer's essence, long dormant, began to stir within the tombs that had once held him captive. His return was no longer a matter of if, but when. The signals that had once been lost in the darkness of the galaxy began to surface. Strange disturbances were felt across the galaxy, from the farthest reaches of the Imperium to the deep voids of the Necron tomb worlds. Whispers began to circulate among the higher echelons of power. Something was coming, something ancient, something terrifying. The Nightbringer's return had become an inevitability, and those who were paying attention knew that they would need to act quickly if they were to prevent the galaxy from falling into darkness. The return of the Nightbringer was not simply the return of a single being. It was the return of death itself. The balance of the galaxy, fragile as it was, would be tested in ways that no one could anticipate. The forces that would rise to oppose him, and those that would seek to harness his power, were already beginning to make their moves. But the full consequences of his return were still unclear. What would the galaxy look like once the Nightbringer had risen again? Would it survive the inevitable destruction he would bring? These were questions that no one had answers to, but the answers would soon come. The events that led to the Nightbringer's disappearance, his imprisonment, and the long millennia of quietude were now but a prelude to the storm that was about to descend upon the galaxy. The galaxy had been marked for destruction, and the Nightbringer was coming to claim what was once his. The time for preparation was over. The time for action was now. The stage was set, and all that remained was for the players to take their positions. The return of the Nightbringer is not a simple resurrection, nor a mere awakening from an ancient slumber. The galaxy is shifting, and in its depths, forces stir that have not been felt for millennia. The Nightbringer's story has always been entwined with the events of the universe, but as time passed, his intentions grew more complex. The long years of confinement in his tomb were not without consequence, nor without effort on his part. While imprisoned, the Nightbringer did not simply exist in stasis, awaiting a time when he would rise again. His will, though fragmented, remained active, reaching out in subtle ways to influence the galaxy around him. During his long imprisonment, the Nightbringer's mind was not entirely shackled. The technology of the Necrons had ensured that his power would be sealed away, but they could not completely silence his presence. Though his physical form was shattered and his essence locked away, the fabric of his being was still intertwined with the dark forces of the galaxy. His very essence remained a part of the stars themselves, and it was through these cosmic connections that he began to plan his eventual return. The Nightbringer's efforts were not direct at first. Instead, they were more like whispers in the dark, ripples in the cosmic tide. He manipulated the very stars, causing disturbances in the fabric of reality. These disturbances were small at first, unnoticed by most of the galaxy, but they grew in intensity as time wore on. His influence spread across the void, subtly altering the course of events. The movements of the stars, the alignment of cosmic forces, and the rise of certain factions in the galaxy. Each of these was shaped, however indirectly, by the Nightbringer's will. His essence sought to bind the galaxy to him once more, pulling at the strings of fate to ensure his eventual freedom. For millennia, the Nightbringer's essence sought to find weak points in the Necron tombs, places where the seals could be loosened. His power over death and destruction was not so easily subdued, and though his physical form had been broken, his spirit endured. Over time, the very tombs that held him became his battleground as he subtly manipulated the Necron's technology to erode the chains that bound him. These tombs, which had once been places of unyielding imprisonment, became sites of dark energy, where the very machines that once contained him were now beginning to betray their creators. While the Necron leaders were focused on their own rebirth and the rejuvenation of their dynasties, they failed to notice the gradual decay in their ancient prisons. The Nightbringer's essence pulsed through the machinery, slowly unraveling the intricate seals that had been placed upon him. The first true signs of his return were seen when the Necron tombs began to awaken once more. While the Necrons were re-emerging from their slumber, many tomb worlds experienced disturbances that could not be explained by the usual patterns of the awakening. These anomalies were the result of the Nightbringer's subtle manipulation. The disturbances in the tombs began to draw the attention of the Necron rulers, who could not immediately comprehend the cause. At first, they attributed the disturbances to the natural workings of the galaxy, the ongoing effects of the galaxy's shifting energies. However, as the disturbances continued and began to intensify, it became clear that something more sinister was at work. The next stage of the Nightbringer's plot involved the influence he exerted over the ancient Necron leaders. The Silent King, the enigmatic leader of the Necrons, had long been seeking ways to reassert the Necrons' dominance over the galaxy. The Silent King's return from his own exile was meant to be the catalyst for the Necrons' resurgence, but it also brought the Nightbringer's influence closer to the surface. The Silent King's awakening had inadvertently triggered the resurgence of the Khitan's power. While the Necron dynasties had long been seeking ways to restore their former glory, the resurrection of the Silent King had reawakened long-dormant energies tied to the Khitan. The result was a slow, creeping influence that began to seep into the very core of the Necron leadership. The Nightbringer, through these subtle manipulations, caused the Necrons' ancient technologies to begin malfunctioning in ways that suggested something far more dangerous was stirring. As the Necrons began to wake from their tomb worlds, they discovered that their ancient servitors, the star gods, including the Nightbringer himself, were far from powerless. This revelation began to have far-reaching consequences. Necron leaders who had once dismissed the idea of the Khitan returning now had to face the terrifying possibility that the Nightbringer's influence was growing stronger. While they were not fully aware of the full extent of his machinations, the growing sense of unease began to spread among them. It was clear that the Nightbringer's return would not be a simple affair, nor one easily quelled. In the shadows of the galaxy, the forces of chaos began to take notice as well. While they were not yet fully aware of the specifics of the Nightbringer's machinations, they sensed the coming storm. The Chaos Gods, ever watchful for opportunities to spread discord and destruction, were drawn to the growing instability in the galaxy. Their agents began to move, seeking to understand the true nature of the disturbances and the power that was brewing in the depths of space. Chaos Space Marines, cults, and agents of the Dark Gods all began to infiltrate regions of space where the Nightbringer's influence was strongest. These forces, though not aligned with the Nightbringer, were ready to exploit the chaos his return would unleash. Meanwhile, the Imperium of Man, though fractured and struggling, had not remained entirely unaware of the growing danger. The Inquisition, ever vigilant for threats to the Imperium, began to investigate the strange occurrences surrounding the Necron tomb worlds. Rumors of the Khitan's return spread throughout the Imperium, though they were often dismissed as mere superstition or exaggerated tales. Yet, those who listened closely began to hear whispers of something far darker than even the forces of chaos, a return that could spell the end of everything. While the Imperium had long since learned to fear many enemies, the return of the Nightbringer was something entirely different. His very nature was death incarnate, and if he succeeded in his plans, the galaxy itself could face an end unlike any before. As these forces converged, the galaxy found itself caught in a dangerous web of intrigue, manipulation, and power. The Nightbringer, though his return had not yet been fully realized, had set in motion a series of events that would ultimately lead to the reckoning of the galaxy. Each step of his return had been carefully calculated, each move made to further unravel the bonds that held him in check. His influence grew stronger by the day, and as his power increased, so too did the galaxy's descent into chaos. The development of events that led to the inevitable return of the Nightbringer is a tale of slow manipulation, ancient grudges, and cosmic forces beyond the comprehension of most beings in the galaxy. His return is not simply the rise of a single entity, but the culmination of eons of careful plotting, subtle influences, and the failure of countless factions to see the signs in time. As the galaxy continues to unfold, the Nightbringer's rise is not just a story of a single being. It is the story of a universe on the brink of destruction, with only the faintest hope of survival remaining. The key event that will trigger the return of the Nightbringer is intricately tied to the shifting forces within the galaxy, where the stars themselves seem to tremble in anticipation. It is not simply the physical return of a single being, but the alignment of cosmic forces that will allow the Nightbringer's resurrection to take place. The galaxy, already in turmoil, is unknowingly nearing the breaking point, and the decision that will push everything into motion is not so much the action of one faction, but rather the culmination of multiple factors converging in a singular moment of cosmic significance. The decision that will ultimately bring the Nightbringer back is the choice of the Necron overlords to reawaken the full power of their ancient technologies. While the Necron dynasty had been steadily reviving, there was one crucial moment when their leaders, under the guidance of the Silent King, decided to go beyond mere rebirth. The Silent King had long sought to restore the Necrons' glory, but it was the temptation to tap into the full potential of their ancient and forgotten technologies that set the stage for the Nightbringer's return. The Necrons' resurrection across their tomb worlds was not enough. They sought something more, a way to decisively reassert their dominance over the galaxy. This decision led to the activation of forbidden protocols hidden within the deepest reaches of the Necron tombs, which had been designed to break the seals binding the C'tan gods. For millennia, these tombs had been places of containment, where the C'tan were sealed away after their betrayal. The Necron knew that releasing the full power of these ancient technologies could break the bonds that held their gods imprisoned, but it was a gamble. The Nightbringer, as one of the most dangerous of the C'tan, had been bound the most securely. Yet the allure of resurrecting the C'tan was too strong for the Necron leaders to resist, especially as they faced growing threats from the other factions of the galaxy. The Necron rulers' decision to unlock these ancient powers would prove to be a fateful one. The technological activation of these seals was not instantaneous. The system was intricate and required a perfect alignment of Necron technology and the unstable energies of the galaxy. These energies, manipulated by the Nightbringer's essence still lingering within the tomb worlds, were now focused and amplified through the awakening process. For centuries, the forces that kept the C'tan imprisoned had been weakening, but it was this final push, fueled by the Necron's obsession with absolute power, that initiated the crucial chain of events. When the final mechanisms were set into motion, it was as though the universe itself held its breath. The tombs began to hum with power as cosmic forces were drawn into the equation, triggering a shockwave of energy that reverberated through the galaxy. This moment, marked by the Necron leader's fateful decision, is the moment that unseals the tomb of the Nightbringer. His imprisonment, which had held firm for so long, now falters under the immense strain of the forces unleashed. The energy released from these tombs begins to resonate with the dormant power of the C'tan, especially the Nightbringer. The galaxy begins to experience strange shifts in its cosmic balance. The stars seem to flicker erratically, and gravity bends unnaturally in certain regions. The very fabric of reality begins to tear in places, allowing the essence of the Nightbringer to reassert itself. As the cosmic disturbances grow, factions across the galaxy begin to notice that something is amiss. The Imperium, always alert to signs of danger, begins to receive reports from various systems about strange anomalies, disruptions in their warp travel, unexplained gravitational anomalies, and signals that echo across the void. The Inquisition, ever watchful of threats to humanity, begins to investigate these anomalies. However, they are still unaware of the full scale of the threat that looms. The Tau, ever keen on observing the larger forces in the galaxy, also sense that something is changing, though their limited understanding prevents them from seeing the true cause of these disturbances. But it is not just the Imperium or the Tau who are unaware of the imminent danger. Even the forces of chaos, though aware of the shifting cosmic tides, do not fully grasp the significance of the Nightbringer's return. The Chaos Gods, ever manipulative, have their own agendas. The forces of chaos begin to stir, seeking to exploit the emerging chaos for their own ends. However, they too underestimate the true nature of the threat posed by the return of the Khitan. While the Nightbringer is a force of pure destruction, he is not easily manipulated, and his rise will be something entirely beyond the grasp of the Chaos Gods. Meanwhile, the Necrons, having awakened the full potential of their ancient technologies, begin to sense the consequences of their actions. The seals that held the Nightbringer are no longer secure. As his power begins to grow, the Necron leaders face the reality of what they have unleashed. The rise of the Nightbringer was not something they could control. The very essence of the Star God begins to twist and expand, gaining strength with each passing moment. His power surges as the tomb worlds continue to hum with dark energy, and the full force of his will begins to coalesce once more. The Silent King, upon realizing the gravity of the situation, takes immediate action. His decision to attempt to contain the Nightbringer once again, to seal him away, is born of desperation. But the Nightbringer is not so easily imprisoned. His power is unlike any force the Necrons have faced. As the Silent King scrambles to gather his forces, the reality becomes clear. The Nightbringer has already begun his return. There will be no easy reversal of the events that have been set in motion. The critical choice of the Necron leaders to activate the ancient technology meant to revive the Khitan had consequences that reached far beyond what they had anticipated. The return of the Nightbringer was inevitable, and their actions had only hastened the process. No longer a being of legend or myth, the Nightbringer's form begins to reappear, his essence weaving itself into the very stars themselves. This moment marks the point of no return. As his power continues to grow, the galaxy begins to feel the weight of his influence. The return of the Nightbringer will not simply be the return of one being, but the beginning of a new epic, an epic where death itself will reign over all things. The Necrons, despite their power, find themselves in a race against time to stop what they have unleashed, but the forces of the universe are beyond their control. The key event that has triggered the Nightbringer's return is an irreversible decision, a decision made by those who sought to resurrect a god of death, unaware that they would be bringing destruction to all corners of the galaxy. The return of the Nightbringer is a cataclysmic event, one that shakes the very foundations of the galaxy and shifts the cosmic balance in ways unimaginable. As his presence spreads across the stars, it signals the beginning of a new era, an era where the forces of life and death are no longer in equilibrium. The Nightbringer's resurrection brings with it an unrelenting wave of death, a force that will unravel the very fabric of reality as it was known. The immediate impact on the galaxy is stark. Entire systems are plunged into chaos as the forces of death, long dormant, awaken. The regions closest to the tomb worlds where the Nightbringer's power is concentrated feel the first tremors. The stars themselves seem to flicker and dim, their life-giving energy slowly being drained. The gravitational balance of certain systems is disrupted, as if the very fabric of space-time is being bent to accommodate the power of the Khitan. The Nightbringer's return is not just an awakening, it is a disruption of the natural order. Where once there was life, now only decay and entropy remain. As his power spreads, the Imperium feels the first wave of this new reality. The vast empire of man, already teetering on the edge of collapse, is faced with a new existential threat. Reports from the front lines of the galaxy tell of entire fleets lost to a mysterious and implacable force. The Imperium's war machines, once the mightiest in the galaxy, are overwhelmed by the sheer destructive power of the Nightbringer's influence. The Imperial Navy, already stretched thin by ongoing wars with Xenos and Chaos, finds itself unable to contend with the unnatural force of the C'tan. Star systems that were once stable fall into disarray, with planets experiencing unexplainable disasters. Some planets begin to lose their orbits, drifting aimlessly into the void, while others are slowly drained of all life, their inhabitants reduced to husks. The most chilling sign of the Nightbringer's influence, however, is the effect it has on the living. The presence of the Nightbringer has a profound impact on the very psyche of those who come into contact with it. Entire populations fall under a shadow of despair, their will to live slowly eroded by the overwhelming power of death that permeates the galaxy. Psychic phenomena become more frequent and intense as the warp itself reacts to the presence of the Nightbringer. The immaterium, the realm of the warp, grows more unstable as the line between life and death blurs. The souls of the dead begin to be pulled toward the Nightbringer's essence, adding to his growing power. This has a cascading effect on the forces of chaos, whose gods find themselves increasingly unable to control the souls of mortals. The very concept of death becomes a weapon in the hands of the C'tan. The Necrons, who had once sought to escape the grasp of the C'tan, now find themselves caught in a web of their own making. Though many Necron dynasties are awakening from their slumber, they find themselves unable to halt the return of the Nightbringer. The Silent King, despite his efforts to maintain control over his people, realizes that the power of the C'tan is no longer something that can be ignored or contained. The Necron forces, though powerful, are now torn between their desire to reclaim their dominion over the galaxy and the realization that they may no longer be in control of their destiny. The Nightbringer's influence over the Necrons grows stronger with each passing day, turning some Necron leaders into unwilling servants of the very force they had once sought to overthrow. As the Nightbringer's influence continues to spread, the galaxy finds itself torn between forces that were once balanced. The Eldar, with their ancient knowledge and foresight, are keenly aware of the impending disaster. Their craft worlds, already scattered and fractured, now find themselves under siege from the very forces they once sought to escape. The Eldari, with their deep connection to the warp, can feel the destabilization of reality, and they know that the return of the Nightbringer heralds the beginning of the end. Some factions of the Eldar, particularly the Harlequins, attempt to warn the galaxy of the impending catastrophe, but their voices are drowned out by the growing storm of death that sweeps across the stars. The Tau, ever expanding their empire, find themselves faced with an unprecedented threat. Their society, which had always been built on the philosophy of the greater good, is forced to confront the reality that there are forces in the galaxy far beyond their understanding or control. The Tau struggle to adapt to a new reality where the very essence of existence is being torn asunder by the return of the Nightbringer. Despite their advanced technology and rapid adaptability, the Tau are faced with a threat that cannot be reasoned with or defeated by simple force. The balance of power in the galaxy is shifting, and the Tau are caught in the middle, unsure of how to survive in a universe that is becoming increasingly hostile. The forces of chaos, long driven by their insatiable desire for power and destruction, are now faced with a new challenge. The Chaos Gods, whose influence over the Immaterium had long been unchallenged, find themselves competing with the Nightbringer's growing power. The disruption of the natural order causes turmoil within the warp, where the Chaos Gods had long held dominion. The Nightbringer's power threatens to unseat the established order within the Immaterium, as death itself becomes the primary force in the galaxy. The Chaos Gods, though mighty, now find themselves wary of the Nightbringer, knowing that his presence may undo all they have worked for. The forces of chaos, though still destructive and chaotic, are now forced to contend with a power that transcends even their own. In the broader sense, the very nature of existence in the galaxy begins to unravel. The balance between life and death, which had always been a central tenet of the galaxy's cosmic order, is now broken. The Nightbringer's return signals the end of an era, and the beginning of one where death reigns supreme. Entire sectors of the galaxy are plunged into darkness as the very concept of life is called into question. Worlds that once teemed with life are now reduced to wastelands, their inhabitants' souls claimed by the Nightbringer as his power grows. The psychic landscape of the galaxy is altered irrevocably. The warp, already a turbulent and dangerous place, becomes even more unstable. Psychic storms, once rare, now rage across the galaxy as the forces of death tear through the fabric of reality. Those with the ability to perceive the warp can sense its growing instability as the Nightbringer's presence begins to warp the very fabric of space-time. Psychic phenomena become more erratic and unpredictable, with entire fleets of ships lost to the immaterium. The once steadfast guardians of the Imperium, the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, struggle to maintain their psychic connections as the tide of death overwhelms their efforts. As the Nightbringer's influence spreads, the balance of power in the galaxy continues to shift. The once unchallenged dominance of the Imperium is now threatened by forces beyond its comprehension. The Necrons, while initially divided, are drawn inexorably towards the Nightbringer's growing power. The galaxy, once teetering on the brink of collapse, now faces an existential threat unlike any it has seen before. The return of the Nightbringer signals the beginning of a new era, one where death will reign supreme, and all living things must question whether they can survive in a universe where the balance has been forever altered. One of the most unique aspects of the Nightbringer's return lies in the very nature of his being. Unlike other cosmic entities in the Warhammer 40k universe, the Nightbringer is not simply a powerful being of immense strength or malevolence. He is an embodiment of death itself. This distinction raises numerous fascinating questions and discussions among the fan community, especially regarding the mechanics of death and the consequences of his return on the fundamental structure of the universe. The Nightbringer's existence goes far beyond the traditional concept of a god or a creature of power. He represents the ultimate force of entropy and destruction, something that is not bound by the usual rules of time and space. His power is not merely the power to destroy, but the ability to bring an end to existence itself. It is often discussed among fans how the Nightbringer's role goes beyond just being an enemy to the other factions. He is a universal force that challenges the very nature of reality, and his return might lead to a situation where all life in the galaxy is reduced to nothingness. One of the most intriguing discussions revolves around the Nightbringer's relationship with the warp. As an entity tied to the very fabric of reality and the essence of death, his presence would have profound implications on the immaterium. The warp, being a realm shaped by the psychic energy of all living beings, could begin to destabilize under the Nightbringer's influence. Fans often theorize about how his return might tear apart the very nature of the warp, as the souls of the living are drawn towards him and the boundaries between life and death begin to blur. This is not merely the death of individuals or even civilizations. It is a cosmic reordering where the basic laws of the universe could begin to unravel. There is also much speculation on how the Nightbringer's return might interact with the other Khitan. While the Khitan are often seen as a collective of powerful beings, each of whom embodies a different aspect of the universe, the Nightbringer is unique in that he represents the complete absence of existence, death, rather than just a force of destruction or decay. In the lore, the Khitan once fought amongst themselves, their own ambitions leading to chaos and betrayal. However, upon their defeat, most were imprisoned and their power sealed away. The return of the Nightbringer would not just be a return of one powerful being, but a potential resurrection of the Khitan as a whole. This raises questions in the community about how the other Khitan, such as the Deceiver or the Void Dragon, would respond to his return. Could the Nightbringer's resurrection be the precursor to a full-scale reawakening of the Khitan, leading to a renewed war among the star gods? Or would the return of death itself cause even the Khitan to fear his overwhelming power? Another fascinating aspect often discussed is the unique relationship the Nightbringer has with time. Death, as an inevitable end, is often portrayed as something beyond the normal flow of time. The Nightbringer is not simply a killer. He is the final punctuation mark in the sentence of existence. Some fans speculate that his return might cause disruptions in the timeline of the galaxy, affecting the flow of history itself. The universe could experience time loops, paradoxes, or even the complete collapse of chronology as death spreads. The concept of time is vital to the Warhammer 40k universe, where many of the factions rely on time-based strategies and technology. The presence of the Nightbringer could bring an end to this concept of linear time, leaving all who experience his return in a state of timelessness, unable to escape the inevitability of death. The nature of death and its omnipresence is another element that fans find particularly intriguing when considering the Nightbringer's impact. While most characters in Warhammer 40k are motivated by power, conquest, or personal agendas, the Nightbringer's motivations are far more abstract. He does not seek to conquer or rule. His goal is the complete obliteration of existence, making him unique among the great powers of the galaxy. Discussions among fans often revolve around whether he is simply acting according to his nature, or if there is some deeper, more cryptic purpose behind his return. Is he merely an instrument of inevitable cosmic balance, or does he have a greater design that even the other Khitan cannot comprehend? His motivations remain a mystery, which only adds to the sense of dread and fascination surrounding his potential return. One particularly interesting and often discussed theory is the Nightbringer's role in the cycle of life and death. While his presence brings death and destruction, there are those who argue that his return could signify a necessary end, a reset for the galaxy. This view suggests that the Nightbringer, in his capacity as the bringer of oblivion, could be seen as a natural force that prevents the galaxy from stagnating or descending into decay. Some fans believe that his return is inevitable in the same way that entropy is inevitable, and that it is part of a grand cycle in which death gives way to new life. This concept ties into the idea of the universe constantly being reborn in cycles, with each end eventually leading to a new beginning. The Nightbringer's return, from this perspective, could mark the end of one era, making way for the next. This cyclical view of the Nightbringer's influence touches upon another commonly discussed aspect, the role of resurrection in the Warhammer 40k universe. The theme of death and resurrection is something that permeates many of the factions, from the Necrons themselves to the forces of chaos, and even the Imperium's reverence for the Emperor. Many fans are intrigued by the idea that the Nightbringer in some way represents the ultimate form of resurrection, not just for individual beings, but for the entire galaxy. If the Nightbringer returns and the galaxy falls into death, could this open the door for some form of resurrection? Could there be a way for life to emerge from the ashes, stronger and more unified? This idea, while speculative, adds another layer to the ongoing conversation about the implications of his return. Finally, the unique technological aspects related to the Nightbringer's return are often discussed in terms of how they might be used by the various factions. The Necrons, in particular, have access to incredibly advanced technology, and the reawakening of the Nightbringer could lead to the discovery or rediscovery of lost technologies that could potentially be wielded by other factions. The relationship between technology and death in the Warhammer 40k universe is an important one, and the Nightbringer's return could reshape the way technology is used by every faction. Could the forces of chaos harness his power to achieve new forms of corruption, or might the Imperium attempt to find a way to use his power to defend humanity? The potential for technological advancement in the face of death is a topic that sparks intense debate and speculation. The return of the Nightbringer will undoubtedly shape the future of the galaxy in ways that cannot yet be fully understood. His presence is a catalyst that could change the very laws of existence, challenge the nature of time and death, and bring about a transformation of the universe itself. The unique aspects of his power, his control over entropy, his ability to alter the fabric of reality, and his ambiguous motives are what make his return such a captivating and terrifying prospect in the Warhammer 40k community. As the Nightbringer's return approaches, the galaxy becomes a stage for a myriad of personalities, each with their own qualities, motives, and ambitions, who are deeply entangled in the cosmic web that binds fate. These figures represent the pivotal forces, both in opposition to and in alignment with the reawakening of death itself. Their strengths and weaknesses will determine whether the galaxy can withstand the Nightbringer's inevitable return, or whether they will hasten the end of all things. One such individual is the Silent King, the leader of the Necrons. A figure shrouded in mystery, the Silent King's return marked the Necrons' long-delayed resurgence. Once the supreme ruler of the Necron dynasties, he fled the galaxy after the betrayal of the Khitan, taking refuge in exile to avoid the wrath of his gods. His decision to re-enter the galaxy, decades after the initial resurgence of his people, is one driven by both ambition and pragmatism. The Silent King seeks to restore his people to their former glory, but he is no mere warmonger. He is a master strategist, calculating and patient, willing to bide his time until the right moment to strike. His strength lies in his intellect, his ability to navigate the shifting tides of galactic politics, and his knowledge of the ancient Necron technologies that could be key to combating the Nightbringer's influence. However, his biggest weakness is perhaps his unwillingness to accept that the galaxy has changed drastically in his absence. He still sees the Necrons as the supreme race, and that hubris could blind him to the growing power of the forces threatening to engulf him. His conflict with the Nightbringer is not one of mere survival, but one of reclaiming control, and in this, his motivations may lead him down a dark path. On the opposite side of the spectrum is Inquisitor Greyfax, a prominent figure within the Imperium of Man, particularly within the Inquisition. A relentless and uncompromising character, Greyfax is a paragon of the Emperor's will. She represents the harsh, pragmatic face of humanity's resistance to the galaxy's encroaching darkness. Her strength lies in her unshakable faith, her keen intellect, and her determination to root out threats before they can grow. Greyfax is a master of interrogation and investigation, willing to use any means necessary to uncover the truth. Her ability to rally the forces of the Imperium and inspire them to act swiftly is formidable. However, her fanaticism is also her greatest flaw. Greyfax often operates under the assumption that there is a simple, righteous path to victory, and she is quick to view those who oppose her as irredeemable enemies. Her narrow worldview, coupled with her unyielding belief in the Emperor's divinity, may lead her to underestimate the true depth of the Nightbringer's power. Her quest for victory could cloud her judgment, causing her to make decisions that could inadvertently lead to greater destruction. Amid the chaos stands Farseer Eldrad Ulthran of the Aldari. A being of immense psychic power and insight, Eldrad is a figure who has long been a voice of caution for his people. As a seer, he sees the galaxy's potential futures, and his role has often been to steer the Aldari away from paths of destruction. His strength lies in his unmatched psychic abilities and his deep understanding of the Eldar race's history. But these gifts come with a cost. Eldrad's foresight is both a blessing and a curse. While he can see multiple possible futures, the sheer weight of this knowledge can often cloud his judgment, making it difficult for him to make decisive actions. His greatest strength is his ability to manipulate the strands of fate itself, but the downside is that he can be paralyzed by the fear of the wrong choice. Eldrad has long sought to protect the Aldari from the forces of chaos, and the return of the Nightbringer is a challenge he cannot ignore. His motives are not simply to oppose the Nightbringer, but to understand how this new threat fits into the larger tapestry of fate and whether he can prevent the galaxy from descending into complete annihilation. On the side of the Imperium, the enigmatic Commander Dante of the Blood Angels represents a figure of unwavering duty. Known for his immense martial prowess, Dante has led his chapter with great distinction for centuries, yet he carries with him the weight of his people's curse, the Black Rage. This curse, a dark affliction that leads many of the Blood Angels to lose themselves in the madness of battle, has been a constant source of anguish for Dante. But his strength lies in his experience, his unmatched combat abilities, and his ability to inspire his warriors to fight with unyielding resolve. Dante is a leader who places the survival of the Imperium above all else, and his deep connection to his chapter's history gives him an almost legendary status among his peers. However, his greatest weakness is his struggle with the Black Rage, which haunts him even in his moments of greatest clarity. It is this inner turmoil, combined with the overwhelming pressure of leading his people in a galaxy consumed by war, that could ultimately undermine his efforts. Despite his bravery, Dante is not immune to the challenges posed by forces like the Nightbringer, and the toll of constant warfare may push him toward decisions that even he would not normally consider. In the shadows of the galaxy, there is also the ever-ambitious Abaddon, the Despoiler, the leader of the Black Legion. Abaddon's motivations are driven by a personal vendetta against the Imperium and the Emperor. His rise to power has been marked by a series of bloody victories and ruthless betrayal, and he represents a force of unrelenting destruction. Unlike many of the other figures in the galaxy, Abaddon is not swayed by notions of fate or balance. He seeks to dominate and crush all who stand in his way. His strength lies in his sheer willpower, his strategic genius, and his ability to command the loyalty of his followers. He has led numerous crusades against the Imperium, each more devastating than the last. However, Abaddon's obsession with power can sometimes cloud his judgment. His overwhelming desire to defeat the Imperium and the Emperor may cause him to overlook the true threat posed by the Nightbringer. Abaddon's strength lies in his ability to sow chaos, but his flaw is his inability to always see the bigger picture. If he fails to recognize the true scope of the Nightbringer's power, his ambitions could ultimately lead to his downfall. Among the ranks of the Eldar, there is the mysterious and elusive Yvraine, the emissary of the Ennead, the god of the dead. Yvraine's very existence is a paradox. As a resurrected figure, she embodies the concept of death and rebirth, making her a powerful and enigmatic force within the galaxy. Her strength lies in her deep understanding of the forces of death and the warp, and her connection to Ennead gives her unique insight into the ebb and flow of life and death. However, Yvraine's greatest challenge is her position as a bridge between the living and the dead. She is often seen as a symbol of hope for the Aldari, but this role comes with immense pressure. Her decision to ally with various factions, including the forces of the Imperium and the Chaos Gods, has been controversial, and her actions are often viewed with suspicion. Her ability to manipulate death itself could prove crucial in opposing the Nightbringer, but her motives are often questioned, as her vision of the future is clouded by the complexities of the forces she serves. These are just a few of the many personalities who will play pivotal roles as the Nightbringer's return threatens to alter the very fabric of the galaxy. Each of these figures brings with them their own strengths and weaknesses, and their actions will ultimately shape the outcome of this epic struggle. Whether they can overcome their flaws and unite in the face of such an overwhelming threat remains to be seen. But one thing is certain. The battle for the survival of the galaxy will be fought not only with armies, but with the wills and decisions of these remarkable individuals. The potential return of the Nightbringer to the galaxy has sparked numerous unresolved questions and speculative theories among the fan community, many of which delve into the deeper mechanics of the Warhammer 40k universe. As the very embodiment of death, his resurrection is a profound event that challenges existing power structures and the laws of reality. The implications of his return are vast, and some of the most interesting and debated topics revolve around the larger consequences that this event could have on the galaxy and the nature of existence itself. One of the most intriguing questions revolves around the possibility of the Nightbringer being a catalyst for the collapse of the galaxy's current cosmic order. As the embodiment of death and entropy, the Nightbringer's return could represent not just the death of individuals or worlds, but the death of the very concept of life itself. Some fans speculate that his return could herald an end to the eternal cycle of life and death in the galaxy. If death itself rises to claim its dominion, it could fundamentally alter the relationship between the warp, the physical universe, and the lives of all creatures. In this scenario, the universe could fall into a state of unchanging stasis or endless decay, where even the gods of the warp and the Catan are powerless to stop the inevitable collapse. This theory raises fundamental questions. Would the galaxy survive at all, or would it be consumed by the cold grip of death itself? A closely related theory involves the potential involvement of Aeneid, the god of the dead, and whether his influence could counteract the return of the Nightbringer. Aeneid's followers, particularly the Aeldari, believe that the resurrection of their god will help guide the souls of the dead to a new and better existence, effectively ushering in a new era for the galaxy. However, some fans argue that the Nightbringer's return would make this impossible. The existence of a god of death whose domain is absolute may overshadow Aeneid's potential to intervene in the fate of the galaxy. In this case, the return of the Nightbringer could render the concept of hope for rebirth and resurrection irrelevant, forever preventing any balance between life and death. This theory suggests that even if Aeneid's followers fight to bring their god back into existence, their efforts may ultimately be futile against the raw power of the Nightbringer. Another unresolved question is whether the Nightbringer's return will be the end of the Necron race's self-imposed slavery to the Catan, or if it will mark the resurgence of the Necrons' ancient servitude. Throughout the lore, the Necrons were enslaved by the Catan, and even after they freed themselves from the Star God's control, their actions have been dictated by a desire to reclaim their former glory. The Nightbringer's return could represent either a tragic re-enslavement of the Necrons or a new chapter in their independence. Some fans theorize that while the Silent King may have made peace with the Necrons' past, he could still be drawn into a power struggle with the resurrected Nightbringer. This leads to the question of whether the Necrons, who have long sought to be free of the Catan, will again find themselves caught in a cycle of manipulation, with the Nightbringer exerting his power over them once more. Alternatively, some speculate that the Necrons, having grown in strength and unity, could challenge the Nightbringer's return directly, potentially resulting in a brutal confrontation that could reshape the power dynamics of the galaxy. One of the more philosophical debates in the Warhammer 40k community involves the implications of the Nightbringer's return for the concept of free will in the universe. As a being whose essence is linked to the very fabric of death, the Nightbringer's resurrection could mean the end of personal agency for the living. While many factions in the galaxy fight for survival, some wonder whether they can still maintain their autonomy when faced with an existential threat that transcends individual will. If the Nightbringer's presence fundamentally rewrites the laws of existence, would sentient beings still have the capacity to act of their own volition? This theoretical dilemma calls into question whether the entire concept of life, individuality, and purpose would collapse under the overwhelming presence of death itself, reducing everything to a mechanical process of decay. The very essence of free will, what it means to live and to choose, may be put to the test in the face of such a powerful cosmic force. Connected to this is the question of the relationship between the Warp and the Nightbringer. The Warp, a realm shaped by psychic energy, has been a source of power for many factions, including the Chaos Gods. The return of the Nightbringer could have disastrous consequences on the Warp itself, as the boundary between life and death becomes increasingly unstable. Some speculate that the Nightbringer could corrupt the Warp, turning it into a place of pure death and entropy, devoid of the vibrant chaos that sustains the Warp as a psychic force. If this were to happen, the very nature of psychic power in the galaxy would change. Psykers would be powerless in the face of the Nightbringer's cosmic force, and the delicate balance that allows the Immaterium to serve as a conduit for communication, power, and travel might collapse. This raises the issue of what would happen to the souls of the dead and the entities bound to the Warp. Would they be consumed by the Nightbringer, or would they be trapped in an eternal state of non-existence? A related theory that has been debated by fans is the question of whether the Nightbringer's return could somehow reset the galaxy's history. If death itself rises to claim dominion, could it also rewrite the timeline of the galaxy, wiping away the mistakes of the past and giving the galaxy a chance at a new beginning? Some have speculated that the Nightbringer's ultimate goal is not merely to destroy life, but to erase the galaxy's past entirely, allowing for a new cycle to begin, one that would be free of the chaos and mistakes of history. This idea raises the possibility that the return of the Nightbringer could lead to a fundamental rewriting of the universe's timeline, where the events leading up to this moment are undone, creating a new world in which death is the only certainty. Whether such a theory would lead to a better future for the galaxy is unclear, but it is certainly a concept that has sparked considerable debate among fans. Additionally, a question that continues to be explored is whether the return of the Nightbringer could lead to a major shift in the relationships between the various factions of the galaxy. The forces of chaos, the Imperium, the Aldari, and the Necrons are all deeply entrenched in their ongoing struggles for dominance. But the presence of the Nightbringer could force them to reconsider their priorities. Could the fear of death itself lead to unexpected alliances between rival factions? Would the Imperium, once united under the banner of the Emperor, be willing to ally with the Necrons or the Aldari in a desperate attempt to stop the Nightbringer's return? Alternatively, could Chaos see an opportunity to use the Nightbringer's power for their own ends, potentially manipulating his influence to further their own goals? These shifting allegiances and the question of how different factions would respond to the return of such a cosmic force remain a source of speculation. Another unresolved theory lies in the role of the Emperor himself. The Emperor of mankind is, in many ways, a force of life and hope, guiding humanity through the darkness. His power is tied to the very survival of the Imperium. Some fans speculate that the return of the Nightbringer could serve as a catalyst for the Emperor's own ascension or his final defeat. The Nightbringer, as a being tied to death, represents the opposite of what the Emperor stands for. Could the Emperor, in some final act of defiance, confront the Nightbringer directly? Or would the Emperor's efforts to fight death itself lead to the ultimate collapse of his reign and the Imperium? This unresolved question could have major consequences for the future of the Imperium and humanity's place in the galaxy. Finally, one of the more controversial topics discussed in the fan community is the idea that the Nightbringer's return could actually be the natural end of the galaxy, a necessary conclusion to the ongoing cycle of existence. Some argue that the Nightbringer is not an antagonist in the traditional sense, but is instead a necessary force in the universe's evolution. If the galaxy is to be reborn, it must first be destroyed, and the Nightbringer's return could be part of a greater cosmic plan that is beyond mortal comprehension. In this view, the Nightbringer's return is not to be feared, but accepted as the inevitable conclusion of the current age. Whether this is a sign of hope or despair for the galaxy is something that fans continue to debate, adding another layer of intrigue to the already complex narrative surrounding the Nightbringer's return. These unresolved questions and theories about the return of the Nightbringer highlight the complexity of the Warhammer 40k universe. The implications of his resurrection are far-reaching, and the theories surrounding his return continue to fuel speculation and debate among fans. Whether the galaxy will survive or be consumed by death remains uncertain, but the journey to uncover the truth about the Nightbringer's return is one that will continue to captivate the imagination of fans for years to come. The return of the Nightbringer will irrevocably alter the course of history within the galaxy. As the embodiment of death, his reawakening marks the beginning of an era defined by the collapse of existing power structures, the reshaping of cosmic forces, and the erosion of the very essence of life itself. The long-term consequences of his return will ripple across every faction, every species, and the fabric of reality itself. How this affects the galaxy in the future will depend on the actions taken by those who can muster the strength to oppose him, as well as how the Nightbringer himself evolves upon his return. One of the most profound consequences of the Nightbringer's return will be the shift in the balance of power across the galaxy. As the force of death sweeps through the cosmos, the long-standing struggle for dominance between the Imperium, the Xenos races, and the forces of chaos will be irrevocably altered. The Nightbringer, by virtue of his existence, represents a force that is beyond the capabilities of any single faction. Even the greatest of galactic powers will find themselves forced to confront the raw inevitability of death. For the Imperium of Man, already struggling with internal division, rebellion, and external threats, the return of the Nightbringer could push them beyond the brink. The Imperium's marshal might be enough to hold off other Xenos and Chaos forces, but it is far less equipped to deal with an existential threat like the Nightbringer, whose very essence challenges the concept of life and death. As humanity grapples with this cosmic reality, it may find itself searching for new ways to protect itself, perhaps even reconsidering its relationship with the Emperor or redefining its purpose in the universe. For the Necron race, the return of the Nightbringer is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it signifies the return of an ancient god, one whose power can help them solidify their place in the galaxy and assert dominance over the other factions. However, the Necrons are no longer the mindless tools they once were, enslaved by the C'tan. They have gained a measure of autonomy and have begun to rebuild their dynasties. As the Nightbringer awakens, the Necron leadership will be forced to confront the reality that the resurrection of their god may bring them back into a servile position under his overwhelming influence. Some Necron leaders may seek to embrace the Nightbringer's power, while others will resist, knowing that their race's hard-won autonomy could be destroyed. The Necron dynasties, in the long run, will be shaped by the struggle between those who wish to wield the Nightbringer's power and those who seek to maintain their independence. This could lead to a fracturing of the Necron race, with civil war breaking out as different factions vie for control over the resurrected god. The return of the Nightbringer could also have profound effects on the warp and the forces of chaos. The Chaos Gods have always sought to manipulate the forces of mortality and life for their own purposes. While they revel in the pain, destruction, and corruption that mortal beings experience, they are also invested in the concept of life as it sustains the energy needed to fuel their existence. The Nightbringer, as a being of death, presents a challenge to this delicate balance. His reawakening could lead to a clash between the forces of chaos and the C'tan. Some chaos factions may seek to ally with or even worship the Nightbringer, hoping to harness his power for their own agendas, while others may see him as a threat that must be eliminated. This tension could create a new power struggle within the Immaterium, where the very concept of death threatens to undo the forces of chaos. In this scenario, the Chaos Gods might find themselves divided in their response to the Nightbringer, which could lead to a weakening of their influence in the material universe. On the other hand, if the Nightbringer were to become fully aligned with chaos, it could mark a catastrophic shift in the cosmic balance, potentially leading to the destruction of the Imperium and the subjugation of the galaxy under the dominion of chaos. For the Eldari, the Nightbringer's return represents a threat to their very existence. As a race that has long dealt with the trauma of their own near extinction, the Eldari are painfully aware of the cost of hubris and the inevitable end of all things. The return of the Nightbringer will force them to confront the inevitability of death head-on. Some factions, such as the Harlequins, may view the resurrection of the Nightbringer as a challenge to be met with cleverness and cunning, while others, like the Craft Worlds, may take a more direct approach, seeking to rally against him in a last-ditch effort to preserve their people and culture. However, the Eldari have always struggled with their own internal divisions, and the return of the Nightbringer could further exacerbate these differences. The factionalism between the Craft Worlds, the Dark Eldar, and the Exodites may intensify as they wrestle with the best course of action. For the Eldari, the long-term consequences of the Nightbringer's return could either unite them in an unprecedented alliance or shatter them entirely. The Tau Empire, though young compared to the ancient races of the galaxy, has risen to prominence through its rapid technological advancement and commitment to the greater good. However, the Tao's idealistic philosophy may not be enough to overcome the existential threat posed by the Nightbringer. While the Tao are known for their adaptability and resourcefulness, they are ultimately a race that values order and harmony above all else. The return of a being whose very nature is destruction and death could be a devastating blow to their civilization. The Tao may attempt to find ways to unite the galaxy's various factions in an effort to combat the Nightbringer, but their lack of experience in dealing with such cosmic entities may leave them ill-prepared. Over time, the Tao may have to confront the reality that their utopian ideals are incompatible with the forces of destruction that now roam the galaxy. The long-term consequence for the Tao may be a loss of their idealism and a hardening of their philosophy, potentially leading them to adopt more ruthless methods of survival. The long-term consequences for the galaxy as a whole could be even more far-reaching. The Nightbringer's return will undoubtedly leave an indelible mark on the very fabric of existence. The struggle for dominance will give way to a larger existential struggle between life and death, with factions unable to avoid their fate. In the wake of his return, the galaxy could become a place of constant upheaval, with each species and faction forced to adapt or perish. The laws of reality itself may be altered as the power of death spreads, rendering the old ways of doing battle and waging war obsolete. The concepts of time, space, and the immaterium could all become unstable as the return of the Nightbringer forces the galaxy to confront the finality of death in ways that no one could have foreseen. As for the Nightbringer himself, his return may not mark the end of his journey, but the beginning of a new chapter. Having been imprisoned and broken for so long, it is unclear whether he will be the same entity he was before. The time he has spent in stasis may have altered him in ways that no one, not even the Khitan, could anticipate. Some speculate that his return could be the start of a new, more dangerous incarnation of the Nightbringer, one whose power is not just that of death, but of complete and utter destruction. Others believe that his time in the tombs could have left him irrevocably changed, perhaps even more distant from the purpose he once embodied. The long-term consequences for him are uncertain. Will he seek total annihilation, or is there something more profound and enigmatic driving his actions? In the grand scheme of the Warhammer 40k universe, the return of the Nightbringer could mark the dawn of a new epic, one where the fundamental balance of life, death, and existence itself is forever altered. The galaxy's future is uncertain, and the aftermath of the Nightbringer's return could result in either the complete destruction of everything that exists or a new beginning from the ashes of the old world. Whether the galaxy survives or succumbs to the Nightbringer's reign will depend not just on the strength of its factions, but on the very nature of existence itself.